Hey everybody, this is Brannen from Sparksmith, helping you see and be seen. Today we had a customer walking off the street with this really sharp 3500 Cateye, and he just put some headlights in it, and he needed us to wire them up. It was referred by a local friend of mine, so I'm going to get these running lights hooked up, and we've got a few things to do in the back. Hook up the third brake light on the camper shell, and a few things back there, so check it out. First thing I did was I came in and used a fuse tap, the ATS style fuse tap, and plugged it into the SEO ignition, so that fuse gets power anytime the key is switched on. So that will make these white running lights turn on white anytime the key is on. And I chose to run it the ground back to, there's a stud on the firewall back here that wasn't being used for anything. So I scraped some paint off of the base of it and put some dielectric grease down and ran an M6 by 1.0 nut down on there with a 10mm socket. And so now I've got my ground and I've got my power. The ring terminals, and I know I can't go with this, but these are the ring terminals I use. I get them from Amazon and they just crimp right on. And then I use these little brass terminals. Brass crimp terminals from, again, Amazon, because they're cheap and easy to find. You take those, you take a specialty crimping tool like this that makes that kind of B-shaped crimp, and you crimp take that brass terminal and crimp it onto the end of the fuse tap wire and onto the new wire. This is 22 gauge silicone wire, silicone wrapped wire. The dual red and black makes it easy for applications like this. And so I ran that down here, cut it to length, and now I'm going to take my barrel terminals. I like using these for these kind of connections. And I'm gonna put the female connections on here, so the females will supply, and then I'll put male terminals on the full wires coming from the headlights, and that will power these. I'm also gonna obviously have a second branch that comes off and goes over to the passenger side to do the same thing. So first you want to slip the protective boot over, because once you crimp the terminal on, you cannot get the boot on. So it's important to do that. So I'm trying to watch the camera and do it at the same time. So it's pretty easy. You just take your terminal, flip this over, make sure everything's lined up, set it in there, and give it a squeeze on the biggest one. And then what I like to do is move it down to the smallest one to get it nice and tight. And then the strain relief, which is the second set of crimps, will get crimped down onto both wires. You don't have to crimp that one quite as hard. Now you can see you've got kind of an OE looking B crimp for the wires and for the strain relief. So you get a nice solid connection. If you want to test it out, just give it a little tug to make sure that it's not going to just slide right off, and then we repeat on the black wire. So we got the female terminals onto the supply wires, and so now we're going to crimp the male terminals onto the input wires for these two driver's side assemblies. So just like before, you're going to take your wire, feed the protective boot onto it first, and then find your tool that you just lost. Sometimes I'll just set this in here first, and then go slide the wire in. Solid crimp, then repeat for the red wires. So you can either put the terminal into the tool first and then slide the wires in, or you can slide the wires in and then put the tool on. Just depends on the bulk of wiring that you have on there. So now we've got those two connections ready to go. So if you've ever listened to any of my stuff before, you'll know that the next thing is the all-important dielectric grease. Don't forget this stuff. It is very useful and will save you lots of headache further down the road. But I'm just going to insert these female ones into the tube, and I squeeze until I see it kind of come out the other end. So that thing's full of dielectric grease now. So in theory, it's not going to rust and corrode and all that. Sorry if my hands are all shaky. I had too much coffee this morning. There. So now this driver's side one should come like that. Look there. What do you know? I did a thing and it works. So now anytime the key's on, these little C bars will come on. So I just got to run an extension over to the other side and repeat the process. So one thing I didn't mention earlier was that I did actually remove this brace right here. It just takes 4 bolts. You pull this whole piece off. It makes it a lot easier to get down into that grounding stud down there. Another thing I wanted to mention was when I ran the fuse tap in here, you might be able to see, zoom in, how the wire just runs down here. So what I did was you can actually pull, this cover can come off. You just have to not kick your, there's a couple of, on the front side here and here, there's these 2 little hooks that kind of catch and hold this thing in place. So one of them, I like to use this, it just makes it easier. You can use a flathead screwdriver or whatever you want, but you have to get down there and kind of pry it away. And then once you release, and you can see them right here, this little slot and this little slot, there's a hook that comes down and hooks into those to keep this from coming up. So once you release those, the whole thing can come up. And then what I did was I notched out the plastic right here to let the wire pass through so it doesn't get crushed. And then I measured the length from the corner to here where the opening is, and did an similar effort right there, again to allow this wire to pass through without getting crushed. So once you notch those wires out, or once you notch the plastic out, slide this thing back down and it won't completely destroy that wire right there. So the last piece of this particular puzzle is just going to use some wire loom and some cloth tape and put this new little harness that I made into the wire loom just to protect it and make it look nicer. So one thing I wanted to mention, when I do the wire loom on these things, I took a tip from what I saw on most of the factory wiring that you'll find is typically they will take whatever tape they're using and they'll tape it to the wire, go around maybe once, and then put the wire loom on and then go around the wire loom. And if you look real close at any factory wire loom and that kind of stuff, that's generally the approach they take. So that's the approach I take when I build my harnesses, because I figure if it's good enough for the manufacturer, it's probably going to be good enough for me. But then once you get that taped up, this can't go anywhere. You've got a strain relief there, and you can just carry on and tape it up on the other end too, just like so. Okay, so I got C lights wired in to switch to power, and then I was looking at, if you look at this cone piece, the shield for the low beam, you can kind of see that it is not sitting like it's supposed to. So we're going to address that, and then we're going to make sure that the headlights are aimed properly. Then I've got one more thing to do back on the back. So while I'm in here, I'm going to address this. And if you don't do wiring on a regular basis, like you end up with stuff like this, and that's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. It'll probably work fine for a while. But when I see duct tape holding a harness together or wire nuts. It is what some might say due diligence, I think is a good phrase here, to address these things before they become an actual issue. So when you tape them up with something like this, mostly what that does is provides a place for dirt and water to get trapped. It doesn't really keep it out, but it will damn sure keep it in. What you want to do is use an adhesive lined heat shrink. And you can typically find that at your local auto parts. Oh, this is even better. They didn't even crimp it. They just twisted the wires together. That's fantastic. It's a little too short for my liking, so I'm gonna cut it off right about there, and we're gonna crimp this on with my brass rings or terminals that I used earlier. Okay, so I shortened these wires. Take my trusty little strippers. Love these things. I'm not an ambassador for Knipex, but that's a good brand. Crimp it once, twice, crimp it thrice. Seal crimp. Important shrink wrap. So slide those on. And since we're running halogen bulbs in here, I'm going to just crimp them on. Polarity doesn't particularly matter. I'm going to do it by the convention that I use. Crimp. Got the crimps done. Just hit it with a heat source, which you can use a lighter. Hair dryer won't get hot enough, but I use a butane torch. Just be careful not to keep it in one spot too long because you'll start burning things. Anyway, the smoke's just coming from the tape that we don't need anymore. And so if you're using the heat shrink that has an adhesive lining in it, like this stuff, typically you heat it enough until you see it that it doesn't shrink anymore. And most times you'll see the adhesive just start to come out. That means you've got it completely sealed up. So there we have it.